episode of PEEPanEIP, an educational series where we learn about improvement proposals, upcoming features, and upgrades on Ethereum blockchain. I'm your host, Pooja Ranjan, and I'm joined by Superfizz and Colfax from ETH Stakers community today. In this episode, we'll be talking about the preparation of Altair from a client's perspective, their experience of implementing features and running the devnets, and of course, the roadmap of the client Prysm. To talk more on this, I welcome our special guests, Terence and Raul from the Prysmatic Labs. Thank you for joining.
Hey, thank you so much, everyone. Yeah, it's great to be here.
I understand we have some interesting stuff coming up next, but before we get into the woods of tech, we'd love to hear how you started this trip. Maybe we can start with a brief introduction, how you joined the Ethereum community.
Sure. Do you want to go first, Terence?
Yeah, sure. So I graduated from college 10 years ago, and before that, I was just working at an enterprise company doing the typical 9-to-5 job. And then the fast forward 10 years later, I was getting kind of bored at what I do every single day, right? And my friend was like, "Yo, you should check out this Ethereum thing." So I started reading more about it, and then I couldn't figure out like where to contribute for the longest part because there's just so much going on. And then luckily, I think it was the early 2018, I joined this Reddit thread, and then they were asking for people, looking for people there working on Ethereum scalability. And then I looked at the Reddit thread, and I joined the Gator chat room, and that's where I found Raul and Preston, and they were actually looking to do the same thing. So we formed the group, and now it's Prysmatic Labs, and the rest is history. Thank you.
Yeah, it was amazing how it all started. My name is Raul. I started Prysmatic with Terence, Preston, Nishant back in it was early 2018. We just we really saw the future of what Ethereum can bring to the world and wanted to just work on the highest impact thing one can possibly do. And really that was implementing proof of stake. And over the coming months and maybe years, that rapidly became the effort known as ETH2. And now here we are, on mainnet with with all these things launched. I remember Terence in the beginning was like, I really want to improve at doing research work. And now he's the #1 contributor to the ETH2 specification outside of the Ethereum Foundation. So, there's been a lot of growth within all the ETH2 development teams. And yeah, here we are.
Interesting. Thank you so much for introduction. I really love this section of the show. Like, it brings us so much closer to know more about the contributors of Ethereum ecosystem. And I really hope that these stories will inspire the young generation exploring technologies. So without further ado, let's peep in.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, so today we're going to be giving a high-level overview of Prysm, our ETH2 client, and how we're dealing with the Altair hard fork, which is coming up, probably within a month to mainnet. The Altair hard fork is the first major upgrade to the Ethereum beacon chain. It's a planned network upgrade. Some of the things that are included, the specific details are out of scope for this presentation, but at a high level, really a lot of optimizations that will just improve the Ethereum 2.0 network itself. And also a lot of cool features that are coming, such as support for light clients. So light client support has been always something that is really critical for blockchains. Being able to have a minimally validating piece of software that can basically track the chain is a very powerful construct that allows us to do a lot of really cool things and preserve decentralization. So Altair is kind of bringing all of that to life. And we encountered a lot of very specific challenges when supporting Altair, thinking ahead about how to structure our project, how to make it maintainable, and how to test things for safety. So without further ado, we get started on the next slide. Cool. So yeah, so we'll be covering kind of what's coming up next in our Altair support, some of the challenges itself that we had when trying to implement a hard fork in our programming language of choice, how we're actually testing kind of like the fork transition and kind of how that looks like in our day-to-day. And yeah, just some more information about how to contribute for those of you that are interested. So what's coming with the support? The support for Altair is actually the first major version increase of Prysm. So we're going to be releasing V2 of our ETH2 client. This will contain full support for the Altair hard fork transition, We have a new slasher implementation, which is really cool, and it's able to just really, help improve the security of the network. And anyone can run it, and just really good to have a lot more better documentation and onboarding. We've been recently working a lot with talking to stakers, really understanding what is the experience of becoming a validator in ETH2. And I think the folks at ETH Staker have been really instrumental in this, and we're going to be engaging with them more. Actually, we have a new team member, James, that just joined us, that is focusing a lot on UX, and we really want to revamp this over the coming weeks. Aside from that, we have full support for the Ethereum Consensus Standard API. This is an API, a public API that all the different teams are aligning to, and is really becoming important for client diversity and for just interacting with the beacon chain. So we put a lot of effort into making sure this works. So yeah, that's going to be coming out very soon. So what are some of the unique challenges that we've faced throughout this journey? This is a bit more involved in the code, but in general, hard forks require using kind of generic functions for processing different kinds of data structures. So for example, like the way that a block looks on the chain is different before the fork and after the fork. Like if you think about hard forks on Ethereum proof of work, for example, like the structure of blocks and transactions changed before EIEP 1559 and afterwards, right? So how do you do that in a way that is maintainable and efficient, right? It sucks that you would have to duplicate everything. Is there a better way? The language of choice for us, Go, does not support generics. So this is really, really unfortunate. It makes things like probably 10 times, 100 times more difficult for a lot of things that we're building. Other languages, it's very easy to write a function that's like, hey, process a block, and then you pass in a block, and this block is a generic block, and you can do all kinds of things. With Go, you can't really do that, right? So how can we do this in a maintainable way that kind of is extensible across hard forks, right? As an example, as we were talking about earlier, you can't really do the above in Go. You can't really have a function called process block that just takes in some generic thing and does whatever, Instead, you might have to duplicate your logic. So you have a function called process block for phase 0 and then process block for Altair. This is unfortunate because if you do this everywhere, when you basically the more code you write, the more probability of bugs that you encounter. And this is extremely risky, right? So like we need to find possibly better solutions than just duplicating everything, right? Basically, we would need to rewrite the whole spec for Altair and rewrite the whole spec for phase 0, and that's not good. So something you can do is you can use interfaces in Go, which are kind of like, they're not exactly generics, but they allow you to specify behavior of certain data structures. So you can define a beacon block interface that is then able to kind of do certain things, so it has a slot function that tells you the slot of the block and all these things. And the Altair block and the phase 0 block implement this interface. They kind of help us, but they aren't really generics underneath the hood. It's not a feature of the language. However, something you could do is with interfaces is, like I said, you could do something like, okay, a phase 0 beacon block, it has this type called sync contribution, which is not supported in phase 0. So then you just kind of throw an error or return some panic, right? So that's kind of one way that you can get around the problem, but it's still something very tricky to solve. Another way that you can get around the trickiness of no generics in Go, especially when dealing with things like hard forks, is use code generation. So code generation is a very popular and very powerful method in Go. Basically, there are a lot of commonalities between data structures that you basically want to ensure they work. You don't want to have to write it by hand. So using generated code to say like, okay, how do you encode a beacon block into bytes? We can generate code that does that both for phase 0 and for Altair. So code generation is our friend for dealing with a lack of generics here. And that's been extremely helpful for us. And there's really a lot to unpack from looking at the changes in Prysm regarding Altair that we'd encourage everyone to kind of look at our repo. And if you're interested in this sort of stuff, there's been a lot of discussions and design, that went into Prysm's Altair changes. So yeah, I'll pass it over to Terence about how Prysm is handling the fork itself.
Yep, let's go. So like Raul said, there's many solutions to this problem, right? And the first solution is that you just copy and paste everything. So in this example, you have your state transition function, which is using the old phase 0 block. and then you copy, paste, and now you have this new execute state transition for Artair that's passing in the Artair block, right? So basically for every new type, we copy all the methods that are used to process block and manually for each type, right? So what are the advantage? So the advantage here is this is very easy to do, right? You just copy, paste, and copy, paste. But there are probably more disadvantage, right? The disadvantage means that when you modify any code, you have to modify all the copy and paste the code. Imagine you find a bug, and then you have to make sure you submit fixes for every single copy paste out there, right? That's a lot of boilerplate code, and it's very hard to maintain, right? Imagine you stake your 32 ETH using Prysm validators. That's about like $100,000, and then you look at our code paste, and then majority of it is just copy paste. I mean, that's probably not gonna make you feel good, right? So the next solution, and the next slide, please, is essentially, so that's a typo. It's not copy all the functions, maybe for Artair. Sorry, can you go back? So that's next slide. So what I mean, so what I mean here is basically abstract the block interface type, right? So instead of passing in the physical block, we're passing in the interface block. So next slide. So as Raul mentioned, the interface type in Go is kind of like a definition, right? You define and then you describe the exact method they are used, right? So it gives developer the flexibility where they can write the code in such a way that as long as they satisfy the interface and they can use the code within the function, right? And then, so the advantage here is that you reduce any duplication. You don't need to duplicate code anymore, right? And then multiple methods to be reused for different types, right? And then if you look at this example, right? So you have this beacon block interface, and then as long as you return a beacon block and then you return a signature, you can use that interface. And same goes for beacon block body. As long as you return attestations, as long as you return deposits, and then you can reuse it. So the code doesn't care as long as you implement these getters or setters, right? So you can think of phase 0 block and then the Artair block, and even in the future, like the merge block, as long as they satisfy this interface and they can be reused. So next slide. Right. So to satisfy the interface, right, the physical block needs to implement this getter and setter, right? So right now you have this Artair sign beacon block function, and then essentially wraps around the physical block, and then you implement the signature and then the block method, right? When you do those two, then you can be sure that it satisfies the interface. And next slide. Right. And then, so this is just a constructor, right? A constructor meaning that if you're passing in the physical block, the tail physical block, you actually here you return the interface. So as long as we do this step, then you can passing in that interface into the function. So that's very neat, in my opinion. Next slide. Right. And then I think something that we're doing a lot better than day 0 is that we are greatly improving our code quality. I mean, we have always been on it for code quality. We hold ourselves to really high standard, but now within our new hire, that we're looking with our new hires and then the experts around us, we're looking to even up our code quality. And next slide. Right.
I can chat briefly about this one. Thanks. Yeah. So this one, we care a lot about basically following really strong software design principles, right? Some of the major things that we're trying to do is really try to enforce this in our code, and a very popular kind of paradigm to think about designing software is called solid. So at a high level, kind of what it stands for is, your functions should have single responsibilities. So, you shouldn't have a function that does something and actually ends up doing something else, or does multiple things that you don't want to happen. You should be able to leverage interfaces and basically simplify your code a lot more. And you should depend on abstractions, not on implementation details, right? This is kind of what we were talking about with interfaces, where our functions, they take in this block interface that defines what a block is, but it doesn't really, but it's not really the concrete, phase 0 block or Altair block. So really just following these design principles has been really, really crucial for us to deal with the Altair hard fork. And a lot of our writing and our rationale is kept in our hackmd. So if you go to hackmd.io at Prysmatic Labs, you'll see a lot of information, especially this design principles document that we've been working on for the past few weeks. Cool. So one more thing is we care a lot about having like cleaner validation pipelines, right? One of the biggest risks for Ethereum nodes in general is the peer-to-peer networking entry points, right? Every node is kind of the server that is in an open network. It's bound to be attacked or to be spammed by malicious peers. It's a very adversarial environment. So something that's very important is to make sure that that code is as clean and as simple as possible. We've been focusing a lot on refactoring and simplifying our validation pipeline so that they are extremely legible and anyone can read Go, can understand what's going on. In this case, say you want to validate a block, you can validate that it has a valid signature, it's canonical, it's from a valid peer, and basically following the specification line by line. And that's been extremely helpful for us in ensuring safety in our previous last few releases. So yeah, Terence, you want to take over this one?
Yeah, next one. So where does the new code live? And so like Raul said, and then I'm gonna reiterate this, right? We're always open for new contributors, whether you want to do part-time, full-time, just want to look at code, you want to audit our stuff, we'll be more than happy to guide you. So there has been probably over, like, I would say 10,000 to 20,000 of new code that has went in since Artair, because of all the changes and because of all the fork logic and then all the networking changes. So in the next few slides, I'm gonna go over like where the code changes are. So for someone that's jumping in, they want to look at the new code, and these are the best place to find them. So so for core transition, such as the beacon chain and validator side of things, where this is where the consensus logic lives, and then it's basically in our Prysm beacon core function. Prysm beacon core package, and this is where like you can essentially test anything related to consensus. And next slide. And then all the networking is under our sync and P2P package. And this is where, like Raul said before, that this is where you prevent DOS. This is where you ensure network can discover the beacon node can discover each other, and then they can coordinate which gossip network to be on. Next slide. And then validator, right? This is the fun one. This is where, as a validator, now you have to do more duty. You have to submit sync committee message, sync committee contribution. So this is where the validators implements the RPC client service. And this is where to look at if you're interested at the validator side of things. Next slide. And then optimization. So we do have optimizations behind our peer implementation, because otherwise it may be a little slower. So if you're into optimizations, you're keen at looking or finding out how we do these optimizations, check out our sync committee cache and the active balance cache, and those are the locations for it. Next slide. And then last but not least, the beacon state, right? So we have this beacon state tree, and essentially beacon state is cache behind it. So we do like copy on write and those algorithm. So if you're looking at state tree caching, how we implement the setters and getters, and state v2 package is the place for that. And then, of course, the new spec test. So shout out to the Ethereum Foundations, all the research implementers. They implement this awesome spec test, which we pass as of today. And these spec tests are under spec test mainnet and minimum folder. Yeah.
Cool. So how do you actually test the hard fork and make sure that it works, right? So when you write software, there are all kinds of different tests you can have. You can test out your individual functions. Like let's say you have a function that takes a square root. Like, can you check that it actually computes the proper square root, right? These are unit tests, very straightforward, and typically everything should be unit tested. You also have integration tests that kind of cover like multiple components together, right? So like, oh, if I receive a block from P2P, can it then be processed into the blockchain and stuff like that? That's a little bit more involved. And if you have all these different tests, that's pretty good, but it's not good enough. Something that's really important is being able to understand how this will perform in a real environment, and basically how will it work if you actually launch a beacon node, if you send out deposits, if you run a validator, if you run an ETH1 node, if you do all these things, just like in the real world, does the code perform as expected? Something that we take, like basically great pride in is basically testing in our end-to-end test suite. But before this, I guess something that we have this fork transition code. So it's like we always check: are we able to upgrade to Altair? If so, then we perform this function that's just called upgrade to Altair. There's quite a few things, but the most important thing is that end-to-end testing is critical. In Prysm, in the client, we actually have a full end-to-end testing suite of beacon node validators and geth nodes on every single pull request. So what this means is that it actually spins up a beacon node, a geth node from Genesis. It actually creates a deposit contract. It sends deposits. It activates validators, and it runs Prysm as long as we want, right? So it does all these things, to simulate the real environment. And this happens on every single pull request we make to the repository. It's not like, we have the testnet and then we try things on the testnet. No, this actually runs from scratch every single time we push code up to GitHub. So we're really proud of our end-to-end test suite, and some of the things that we use it for are very important. We have these evaluators that are very easy to add. So basically we say, okay, I want to evaluate the following things. We want to make sure that validators are participating, that the chain finalizes, that we can voluntarily exit, that validators, can perform the fork transition. So we have all these different evaluations that we can then verify against our end-to-end test suite. So this is a way that we can really ensure that the fork transition goes smoothly, right? To give you guys a very simplified version of what an evaluator looks like, this is just a very straightforward check. There's a lot more that actually happens here and a lot more you can do here. But basically this evaluator says, hey, I want to check that a fork transition actually occurs. So what it's going to do is it's going to be getting a block after the fork epoch, and it's going to say, hey, did you give me an Altair block or a phase 0 block, right? If you gave me a phase 0 block, that's wrong. We should have already performed the fork, after that epoch. You can do a few other things after that. You can verify certain things about participation, check that the chain continues finalizing. So our end-to-end test suite has saved us many, many times. It's a way to ensure that very critical things never break. And that's something we've been putting a lot of effort into, right? Cool. So how to contribute? So if you're wondering about how to get started, there's a lot of room to help with reviewing code by cross-checking against the specification. So there's the E2 specs repo, and you can compare that with our changes to the Altair fork in the Prysm itself. You can find gaps in testing, right? So unit tests are very important. You can try to run tests using the Go test coverage tool, and you might realize that some packages could use a lot more love, a lot more testing. Find ways that our code is confusing and bring it up. If this doesn't make sense to you, if this is weird, if this isn't like the way that you should write Go code, then tell us and tell us the rationale of why you think that is. And contribute to open issues on GitHub. We're more than welcome. You're more than welcome to help to join in. We will help you. So we're also hiring. We're hiring for DevOps and security engineer positions. Come join us. We're on the brink of one of the largest accomplishments in Ethereum, which is shipping proof of stake to the entire network. So it's a really great time, and there's a lot to look at, a lot to see. And yeah, please apply. You can find more information on our website, prysmaticlabs.com, and probably more information in the show notes. So that's it for us. Should probably open up for questions or conversations.
Thank you so much for this detailed presentation. I mean, you already have answered a few questions that was listed in my sheet. I'm glad that it got answered and we have room to talk different topics as well. First, I would like to open the floor for our friends from the EatsTaker community to go ahead with their questions.
Hey guys,
Cool.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, that was awesome. Superfizz, you want to jump into something?
Sure. Yeah. Well, what I recognize is my questions tend to be far more high level. I'm not a developer. Colfax has his own set of questions. So my opening questions should be the kind of easy ones. Regarding the new slasher, is that, previously we had suggested that community members who are interested in running a slasher maybe do that on a separate piece of hardware from their validator because of the hardware requirements. Is the refactored slasher something that might change that, or is it still something that you would want to consider running on a separate machine?
Yeah, it's probably a good idea to run on a separate machine, and just like, we're releasing a new slasher doesn't mean that we're releasing this like perfect new thing. It's also gonna be a new, it's gonna be new. So they're gonna be bugs, there's gonna be bugs and new things to improve, but we're confident that it will be a lot better in resource use and like previously the old one it would not do well in periods of chain instability. So we're really proud of kind of what we put together. And yeah, we would still recommend running it separately just to get started and treat it as kind of like still like, a beta software of a new slasher version. Yeah.
Sure. Well, and slasher, it's always kind of a thankless job anyway, because you kind of hope it's never used. And then, apparently it is used pretty often. So obviously I've been screaming the past few days about the need to improve client diversity. And, obviously we're on the same team. I love Prysm and, I support you guys 100%, but, we all share this desire for a more balanced network. Will the interface tools, will the tools that you all create make it easier for people to switch to other clients, or is that something that you feel like the community should reach out and develop?
I'll say one thing and then maybe I'll pass it over to Terence. So one thing that will definitely help a lot is that we're now going to be fully compliant with the Ethereum standard API for the beacon chain. So like that means, basically it would ideally allow, for example, something like, people to use Prysm as a failover beacon node. That's still not something that is fully rolled out yet. But that's a first step, like having full support for the standard API is going to be really huge. Aside from that, I'll pass it over to Terence if you have some more ideas here.
Right. I think aside from E2 API, our slashing exchange is fully compatible. So you can actually import slashing protection backend if we go from Lighthouse or Validator to Prysm Validator or vice versa, that you can import the slashing protection history. And that's very important, and that's being implemented. And something on the higher level, it's I think it's more important to level the playing field. By level the playing field, I mean like what features are people looking for? Because like a lot of times I go into the Discord or like Reddit, and then I always ask what people want, right? And then you'd be surprised, a lot of people want Windows, and then a lot of people want Windows binary, and a lot of people want the UI and stuff like that. Yeah. So yeah. I would say there should be more like a centralized effort in terms of just survey wise, which Raul and our new hire James are doing really well at. They're asking what people want, but I think we can do an even better job at that. And then we can share the information around, and then essentially, basically, have all four clients achieve the same goal.
Yeah, and I appreciate you said that. Everyone that I talk to, well, that's not true. Most people that I talk to want a Windows implementation for other clients. When I grab them and shake them, why aren't you trying other clients? It's because there's no Windows implementation. So I do acknowledge that it is in many ways an opportunity for other clients to step up to that plate. My final question is more about Altair in general. Will validators expect any different operation? Is there anything significant that will change from the end user perspective?
Nope, it is the same thing. It's seamless. If you're running PEEPanEIP Validator combo, you just have to upgrade your software before, and that is it. That is it. And then we're doing a very careful job to make sure, like, even for monitoring from the UI's perspective, that nothing breaks. Because like we don't want to scare people, right? Saying like
Yeah.
you monitor something and then all of a sudden your participation dropped to 0, and that's because of using the wrong endpoint, or that's because of the endpoint did not consider a tear. So we're doing an extra careful job on that. But from the end user's perspective, nothing will change.
The most important thing is we definitely need to get word out there that people need to upgrade well in advance. They should. So I think we are looking for end of September V2 release for Prysm. So that gives probably around 2 or so, a little bit over 2 weeks before the fork. So that's really important. We just need to, put that everywhere, share it everywhere, upgrade your nodes, so that's, similar to what we do with ETH1.
This is something I feel like I should already know, but are the Altair clients already in releases?
I think a few clients already have support for it, but
Okay.
There's still a lot of optimization to be done. So I think probably Teku, I might be mistaken here. I don't want to say something wrong.
No, yeah, that's fine. And feel free to speak for Prysm. I mean, it's our responsibility to find out the other clients. Is Prysm ready for? Is the Prysm release ready for Altair?
It'll be ready in the V2 release coming out by the end of September. Yes.
Okay.
It'll be 100% ready to go. So.
Great. And with that, by the way, I want to drop in. I was really impressed to hear the mention that a validator is spun up for every PR, because that just imagining how that might run is very impressive. So that's ingenious.
It's fake money, of course. It's like a local box, a local universe, right? But yeah, it spins up a real geth node, a real deposit contract. It sends the ETH, that does all that stuff, and and it checks all kinds of things. So
very cool testing stack.
That is really cool. Yeah. So I was writing down some questions as you went through, and you guys did an awesome job really answering most of them. But I guess on the testing side, and Superfizz was saying that I'm going to ask some hard questions. Maybe I don't think I'm going to ask a hard question. Maybe slightly more software focused. But from the testing side, like obviously you're coordinating a lot with the other client teams. How much of your either testing suites or testing procedures and coding standards can be and are shared across teams, or do you guys kind of just come up with your own strategies?
Good question, Terence. Do you want to share some insights on this one?
Right. So at the minimum, we have the ETH2 spec test. This is a cross-client vector test. So that ensures that if you pass the spec test, all the clients could talk to each other at the most happy cases. It means that all the clients can run state transition the same. They can serialize and deserialize objects the same. So, but then we cannot count on that, right? Because like there may be testing gap. It is getting a lot better though. So shout out to Alex. He has been doing such an amazing job at minimizing the test gap. And then on top of that, we have our end-to-end test. And there's something that I'm really passionate about doing is that right now for our end-to-end test, we spin up real life scenario like a deposit contract, real beacon node, and validators, and then we progress the chain for like 10 epochs. But I do want to bring other clients into this end-to-end test, so we'll have Teku, we'll have Lighthouse and more into the end-to-end test, and therefore we can help each other to catch bugs that may not happen if just a single client end-to-end test. And that's something that I do really want to work on. Yeah.
I just want to say that that's actually a really good suggestion to you said, like, to make it accessible to other teams. If it can be extracted from Prysm in a way and like made it so that, yeah, like this end-to-end test, it could be easy for the other teams to also run and include their own stuff in there. And it's like a common suite of tests that everyone runs. I think that'll be really cool.
Yeah, right on. Like I was just thinking, like the end-to-end tests, I mean, they're interacting with the client and the validator, presumably with the same interface. So in theory, it should be able to be used for multiple different clients. On the other hand, I was wondering if like test decentralization makes sense as well. So like having different implementation of tests in case there's like a flaw in the testing suite, there's also like good to have diversity in there. So I guess maybe there's positives and negatives of having different testing suites. But yeah, that's a cool thought. How does developing this software project differ from previous software projects?
Yeah, he's wondering how working on Prysm is different than other projects you've worked on.
There's a lot. I think Terence, you have probably a lot more experience on this front.
Yeah, I can go first. So like I do work on a company for like a good 8 years of my career to start up, right? So the biggest difference is that the difference between closed source and open source, right? Just when you work on a company like Facebook, Google, right? Most of the things are closed source and the what you touch, right? It's like there you have to sign in like an NDA, and then if you disclose some information, you will probably lose your job, and then you probably get fired. That's pretty bad, right? And then so every person you interact with is likely in your office. It's probably someone you can talk to, like, and then you have more of a hierarchy structure. You report to the manager reports to the director reports to the VP, and so on, right? And I would say this is very different in a way. It's very exciting and refreshing for me. I think first thing first, everything is in the open, right? Like every work I do, you can see it. Like when I push a code, if it's shitty, you can tell me, you can see it. Like everything that you do is in the open. And second thing is that, and the second thing is that you can interact with the developers more openly. Like today, I can knock on Danny Ryan's door, be like, hey, what is this, right? Instead of like, you can never knock on someone that works at Google, be like, hey, how come the search engine doesn't work? So you have this more close interaction. So I found that really cool. And then the last thing for me was just like, you get to work with people that are all over the world, right? We have like half of our team in the US, we have half of our team in Europe and Asia and stuff like that. It is a global operation. You get to travel, which is nice. And then you get to meet a lot more different type of people in terms of culture and stuff. I've always found that very fascinating. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah, I totally echo what you're saying about being like an open source project and accessibility, being able to talk to different people. It's cool. Earlier, you were talking about increasing your coding standards. And I imagine in some cases, like you might need to be addressing technical debt in certain releases, things like that. How do you decide between new feature development and addressing technical debt when deciding on what's going to go into a release?
Yeah, I think previously we used to cut some corners, and that's a mistake that we think we could have improved. And by that I mean that we would have this feature that really needed to go in. We would try our best to really review it and whatnot, but we would end up merging kind of like these large pull requests with a lot of code, and like we changed that practice. Like we basically, if we think that a feature is important and it is very critical, we take a step back and we actually, we don't compromise on time. We take our time and we're like, no, we're gonna like break this up, review it carefully, and work on changing it, to how it could be. Sometimes you see some code and you're like, oh, we're kind of in a rush to ship this feature, but then the code standards and the code quality are not up to what we all expect. We don't compromise on that, and we all take a step back. We're like, let's redesign it from first principles. And we write a lot of design documents. So for those unfamiliar, like design documents are basically these kind of like this. They can be like these 1-pagers or 2-pagers that are like, give us a background, just share a background of like what this problem is. What's the current solution? What are you suggesting? What are some alternatives? And we kind of flesh things out. We talk with the team. We have design review meetings. So we discuss and we try to all be on the same page about how to do something. So lately, we put a lot more effort on that and a lot more design first rather than writing the code first, especially for Altair, which is why it's been taking us longer, I would say, than other client teams and other folks. We have some unique challenges in Go, but also we took the time to address some technical debt because we think it's worth it. And we think that it's worthwhile for security, right? So, and I think that it will pay off dividends instead of trying to ship it like as fast as possible.
I think so too. And so on that note, like, how do you sort of decide when it's ready? I guess there's some specific, like for Prysm, how do you decide when Prysm's ready? But then also as a group, like how do you decide when Altair should be launched on mainnet?
For deciding when to launch, I think that's probably more like something that like Danny Ryan and the Ethereum, research team kind of talks to all the different teams and asks kind of where they're at and gives enough buffer for the community to be ready and to update their software and whatnot. So I think that was kind of more like a consensus decision. For us internally, it's about like, basically what worries us, right? It's like, is there anything that is scary, that worries you, that makes you feel uneasy? Then we cannot ship until we fix those things, and I think that's what we spend a lot of time on when working on the Altair changes. Like, oh, this feels fishy, and like should we leave it as is, or should we change it? No, we should change it. So until those concerns are pretty much resolved, I think we were not ready. I think at this point we have finished merging in all the different Altair features into our code base. Now it's just a matter of having more eyes on it, reviewing more, trying to fix small things that we make us uncomfortable. But we're still aiming for that release by the end of the month.
I just want to add on top of that, in terms of new feature, right? We do have this concept of a feature flag. If you look at our release notes, and then if you look at our release, right? Like we often mention this optimization flag where you have to do, for example, dash enable this cache, dash enable whatever this optimization. So those awesome and fancy things, usually they're gated behind a flag to start with. And then after maybe like a few months of having those running in the wild, whether it's through testing, local testing, whether it's through remote cluster testing or through user testing and stuff, we will gradually release those flags out in a while. So when there's a new feature, we take it very seriously. We don't just release it out by default, right? We usually have a flag to basically get the feature behind it.
Yeah, and we have a promise of backwards compatibility for like major versions of Prysm. So like if you're on V1 of Prysm, every single V1 release will work for you. So what's been really crazy is like we had a few people come into our Discord some other day and they're like, hey, I'm having some issues, like my validator isn't running, what's going on? And they hadn't updated since December 3rd, 2020, and like it still works, and like, oh, I haven't had any problems until today, like, kind of weird. So we keep this backwards compatibility. We don't want to break people's setups, especially people at home, on every release. So V2 does have breaking changes because everyone needs to upgrade. So we might as well take advantage of that time. So just, yeah, from a user perspective, you probably won't have to do much. It'll just be, an upgrade, seamless. For more advanced operators, make sure to definitely read the release notes and what's going on in there. Some flags and some configuration things might have changed. So yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Colfax and I actually share the last question. In general, like as ETHSticker and as ECH, we know it's our role to, put the information out there to encourage users to update, to support that update. Is there anything else the community can do to provide support? Like I know we get the push to update, but what else might community members offer to help support this effort?
I'd say like finding ways to something like Terence mentioned, we're working on improving like the UX of like, but being trying to install the software and become a validator and whatnot. So probably having more conversations around that. Like I think something could be interesting is looking at all the different clients, documentation, onboarding, right? Like what are some things that are unclear? I think we would benefit a lot from having better canonical documentation. By that, I mean that there are a lot of really amazing guides out there. Like I know Summer ESAT has like an incredible guide that is successful for a lot of stakers, right? So a lot of people end up using those third-party guides, maybe because our docs are not that great, and like we admitted that there's a lot of room to improve. So I think finding ways to, how can we improve documentation, like the client team's documentation, how can we maybe try to standardize them quite a bit, right? So that, somebody looks at TechWiz docs and looks at Prysm's docs, they can kind of know where to find things. And like, that would be a really cool initiative. So just, I think more help on that front would be good. Just something that came up off the top of my head.
Yeah, that is actually a great idea. It's one of the things that I'm very interested in is multi-client installers that would kind of standardize the process and give the end user one interface, and from there they're choosing what do I want to run. Yeah, I really feel like that's a great way to resist tribalism. There is there's significant tribalism for Prysm right now, and like that on one hand, like you should be so proud of that because you have this really strong community. But obviously we all recognize what tribalism leads to. But yeah, so I do love the idea of multi-client installers and a single interface for multiple clients. So that's a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Colfax and Superfizz, for all these questions. I'm hoping that this will be helpful for people.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was really great. Thanks for the great presentation and answering all these questions.
Right.
And thank you, Pooja, for hosting.
For our guest, you have already passed the difficult phase of question answers. I have questions which are relatively lighter and not directly related to technical stuff, but in general that people would be interested into. I heard that you guys are talking about documentation. There is a special emphasis on documentation. Personally, I am very much impressed by the Prysm team. I remember publishing about a how-to article on Sapphire testnet phase 0 on my own EtherWorld website back in July 2019. That was very much inspired by the testnet article that was published on the Medium. So Prysm is a leading choice of validators right now. I understand the team has come a long way on clients documentation since the beginning, though you already have accepted that there is still room for improvement. I assume that plenty of resources are available to set up a node for a beginner's point of view. Do you think the documentation have helped users getting on board and making Prysm the #1 choice for the new validators, or what is the primary reason you may think of?
It's hard to say. It's probably a lot of different factors. I wouldn't discount, I think everyone, but I'd say all the different teams have, I would say, pretty good docs, and they all put a lot of effort into that. I think there have been a lot of community-based guides as well that have been really helpful. And a lot of people use Summer ASET's guide for Windows, which probably contributed to a lot of validators running Prysm on Windows, right? So you have a lot of that. And I think those community homebrewed guides make a big impact on people's choice of client. So I think that's something that, definitely, I know the ETH-Taker community is probably keeping in mind. And, one other thing is that it seems like the highest impact thing for client diversity is to really work with the large institutions or the large stakers, right, and try to get them to the other implementations. I think at that point we will start to see hopefully more of a balance. But yeah, really all these efforts that are ongoing, really standardization of APIs, better guides. I know Superfizz is doing a lot of stuff to how can you onboard into Teku or Nimbus or whatnot. So really those things will have impact on the average staker, but we really need to get the big institutions to embrace more client diversity.
Right. So I have been following the Prysmatic Labs Medium for information and post, but I did observe the mention of hackmd. So I'm wondering if it is migration from Medium to hackmd, or both are equally good.
No, we're keeping our Medium. We're now doing kind of monthly or maybe bi-monthly updates. So we just kind of, our bi-weekly updates used to become super in the weeds and very specific, and readership was very low after a while. So we kind of wanted to keep more high-level updates released every month on Medium. So we'll still be using that for sure. hackmd is just internal for our team documents, but even those are open to the public. So a lot of the stuff that we do and how we work is open to people to see and to read. Yeah.
So we talked a lot about client diversity, and I think I came across this comment on Reddit that E2 could halt like Solana if we do not have proper client diversity. I consider that with this excellent team, development team behind Ethereum chain, I don't imagine this to be happening. But if you have to suggest what as a community we can do to support this client diversity.
Yeah, Terence, do you want to add something?
I will probably say knowing what the features are, knowing what people want is the first thing. Like there could be a survey and stuff like that, and then we can figure out like what are people looking for, right? And then once you have that, then we can probably have some sort of checklist to see, hey, do all the clients have that, and what are the clients missing, right? Because a lot of times it's like people are chase feature, right? Like people don't really care like what they're running. Because like if you look at profitability or like all for clients there, it's the same, right? There's no clients making you more money. If they do, it's probably like 1 or 2 cents. It's not that big of a deal, right? Then so what's important to look at is that how easy it is to onboard a validator from the client's perspective, right? So if we can do that and make all the clients exactly the same, I think the client diversity will be better.
That make a lot of sense. So let's talk about running the ETH1 node, like the proof of work chain. It's not necessary to run the ETH1 node for a user who wants to run the validator. According to a recent survey conducted on Reddit, we found that about 50% validators run their ETH1 chain, like the execution chain. And there has been a dramatic decrease in the nodes. Do you think it's because of the change that we are going to expect, or is it because that is more convenient to use third-party services?
So I think for now, it's more convenient to use third-party service because there's no, I would say, incentivization to not use third-party service, right? If Infura gave you free endpoint, and then you can propose block, fine, your validator performs fine, it's free. Why waste the extra 1 GB of memory that you have in your computer, right? But there's also the future phases, right? For example, the merge that you, with the proof of custody, you do kind of need to run your own ETH1 node unless you trust Infura with your data and stuff like that. There may be slashing penalties in place, which is still under discussion. So the end goal is essentially to have everyone run their trusted ETH1 setup. And I do believe it's important that we educate this as early as possible, so it's not all of a sudden it's like, hey, you have to run your ETH1 node, right? If we can educate this as early as possible, I think that will be really good for the community.
Right. And for the users, actually the validators, what are your thoughts on staking pool services? Like recently, Rocket Pool announced that they would be launching on mainnet on October 6th. Do you think it is helpful for people who don't understand the complete mechanics behind the staking? It's just easier to go ahead with the pool?
Yeah, I think you can never really get rid of that. You know, like people want different things, and there's a user persona that is really, really just cares about getting yield on their ETH. And if there is enough social credibility about a service or a company, they will use that. And I think it's important to support those people. Like really, they stake and they help with securing the network by adding more ETH to the validator registry. So yeah, I mean, we personally are really big fans of things like secret shared validators and things such as like staking pools that aim to be far more like decentralized and whatnot, non-custodial. We think those are important, right? It's it's not like, oh, that sucks. Everyone should run their Raspberry Pi or Nuke at home, or like everyone's constraints are different. I think as long as like the baseline of running a beacon node and a validator at home is doable and like is an option, I think that's what's really important. Knowing that there is a thriving community of home stakers and keeping that as an invariant is what really matters. And also secret shared validators are also critical for, I would say, for the overall security in Ethereum in the future.
I have just this last question for you. Impact of Altair on validators. I was going through this report by Pentel modeling the impact of Altair, and it kind of mentions that Altair would be introducing a sync committee for light client functionality and reform to validator rewards and penalties. There are chances that the variability of total reward will increase, and this may impact solo staker. So what are the chances that validator rewards will be decreased as such before it is before Altair?
So Artair introduces this new sync committee, the concept. So there's this one more reward that's coming out, right? That's the sync committee reward. But there's only if 512 validators get to participate in the sync committee, and so the chances are pretty low and stuff like that. But if you do participate, consider yourself a lucky one. I want my validator to be in it every single day and stuff like that. So there's probably more insurance, I would say, because of there's this new extra rewards that's being added on top, but it's very minimal because it's only 512 of validators per day. So yeah.
Thank you. This is so interesting, and I'm so fascinated. I appreciate all the hard work that you guys are putting into. So we are on time. Does anyone have any final question or comment to add?
Yeah, I just want to give a shout out. Just me and Raul are here, but there's like a lot of people behind it on my on like our team that's been working on this day and night. So I want to shout out to Nishan for making all the spearheading all the networking changes and stuff, and Prysm and Casey with all the awesome code reviews that have been doing, and Reddick with all the API changes. Without Reddick, we wouldn't have interop. And of course, who with all the optimizations, and James, new hire, with all the UI stuff that he has been working on. So yeah, thank you guys for all the hard work.
Thank you. Thank you, Terence and Raul, and also our friends from ETHStaker community for taking out time and join us today. The team is doing a great job explaining and keeping the community on the same page. And I hope this episode would be helpful for our current beacon chain user, as well as the future validators for proof of Ethereum. On this note, for all our YouTube viewers, thank you for watching this episode. We have provided Twitter handles of the guests with some of the resources on Prysm and Altair upgrade in the description section below. We will also find a link to earlier episodes that we recorded with few other contributors of Beacon Chain on the topic of Altair. If you like this episode, hit the like button and share it with the other community members. We have more coming up on Altair in the next episode, so stay tuned, keep watching, keep sharing your love with Ethereum cat herders. See you soon. Have a good one.